Jet fuel and antiseptic don't mix. The smell is wrong in a way that goes past unpleasant and lands somewhere in the body, somewhere behind the sternum, where the old instincts live. Élise Tremblay knew that smell the moment the ventilation shaft pulled it in from the parking lot, and her hands, which had been perfectly steady while changing a wound dressing on the man in Bay 7, went absolutely still. Not calm. Still, there's a difference. She was 3 weeks into her placement at Sainte Marie Regional, a Level 3 trauma center, 40 minutes outside of Montreal, floating from unit to unit the way she'd been doing for 2 years now. Cardiology on Monday, ortho on Tuesday, wherever they needed a body that could follow instructions and stay out of the way. She was good at staying out of the way. She had spent a long time practicing. The charge nurse that morning was a woman named Thibodeau. Marguerite Thibodeau. She had the energy of someone who had survived 22 years in emergency nursing by developing a very specific contempt for anyone who hadn't. She wore her reading glasses on a beaded chain and used them to point at things she found disappointing, which was most things. "Tremblay," she had said that morning, not looking up from the assignment board. "You're floating R today. Don't touch the central lines. Don't touch the trauma bay unless I tell you. Don't rearrange the supply carts, vitals, turnovers, and keep yourself small." "Understood," Élise had said. Thibodeau had looked up then. A short, evaluating look, the kind reserved for agency nurses and weather systems. "You float a lot," she said. It wasn't a question. "I do," Ellie said. "No roots," Thibodeau said, and went back to her board. Élise had not argued. You don't argue when someone says something true. She'd been a ghost before. She knew how to inhabit the negative space of a building. You learn it overseas, how to move through a room and leave no impression. How to let your eyes go soft and your shoulders round, and your voice flatten to something institutional and forgettable. In Kandahar, that skill had kept her safe. In a civilian ER in Quebec, it just kept the charge nurse off her back. The ER at Sainte Marie was not quiet, but it was ordinary. A man with a laceration from a table saw who kept insisting it looked worse than it was. A woman in her 70s with chest pressure hurt. Her daughter holding both her hands. A teenager who'd taken something at a party and was now staring at the acoustic ceiling tiles like they contained a personal message. The rhythms were different from trauma surgery or cardiac step-down, but the baseline noise was the same everywhere. Alarms, footsteps, the wheeled percussion of equipment carts. After a while, it dissolved into something neutral. Background radiation. Élise was in the supply room counting IV bags when she felt it. Not heard. Felt. A low, rhythmic thud that started in the soles of her shoes and worked its way up through her tibia, her femur, the base of her spine. She put a hand flat against the metal shelving unit, and the vibration hummed back at her. Rotors. Not the light, fluttering chop of the orangey helicopter that landed on the roof twice a week. This was something heavier, something that displaced a serious volume of air with each blade cycle. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds, counted the interval. Condom, 2 aircraft, maybe staggered by 30 seconds. She set down the IV bag she was holding. She placed it very carefully on the shelf, like it mattered where it landed. In the main corridor, the civilian staff had just started to notice. A nurse named Desroche was frowning at the ceiling. Dr. Vachon, the attending, was standing at the central station, looking at his pager, as though it had said something rude. Nobody had connected the sound to anything yet. They didn't have the reference. You need a very specific kind of experience to hear a CH-147 Chinook and understand, immediately and in your body, that the situation has changed. Then the emergency radio at the charge desk crackled. A voice came through, clipped and without preamble, asking if Sainte Marie could receive 4 casualties, trauma protocol, ETA 4 minutes. The voice used alphanumeric coordinates instead of a street address. It used the word exsanguinating with no particular affect, the way a mechanic says seized. Thibodeau picked up the handset. She listened for approximately 10 seconds. The color left her face in one smooth motion, like a tide going out. "This is a level 3 facility," she said. "We do not have the surgical teams for." The voice kept talking. Thibodeau stopped talking. She set down the handset with a care that suggested she was buying herself 2 more seconds of normal. Then she looked up at the ER and said, loudly, "Code Orange. All available staff to trauma, bays 1 and 2. We have incoming, military casualty transport." The department reacted. Not well, but it reacted. Desroche knocked over a cup of pens. Dr. Vachon started issuing orders that overlapped with each other. A junior nurse named Pelland, who was doing her first ER rotation, pressed herself against the wall near the nurse's station and did not move from it. Élise did not react. She walked to the doorway of the supply room and stood there with her arms at her sides. She was calculating. 4 casualties. Tandem rotor aircraft, which meant volume transport, which meant they weren't coming from a local training accident. The closest combined arms training area was CFB Valcartier, 40 kilometers north. But the sound she'd heard was wrong for Valcartier. Too loaded, too deliberate. These aircraft had been flying for a while. Whatever this was, it had not started here. The ambulance bay doors at the far end of the department opened before the helicopters had even landed. Someone had triggered them remotely. Through the frosted safety glass, Élise could see the rotor wash flattening the shrubs in the hospital's small front garden. Leaves in a coffee cup from the smoking area skidded past the window. Then the first team came through. They were not walking. They were moving with the specific forward momentum of people who had already made every decision and were now executing. 4 of them, in multicam plate carriers, with the shoulder patches of a unit Élise, recognized from a briefing she'd attended 6 years ago in a building she was not supposed to name. They were carrying a litter. On the litter was a man who was not moving. Behind them, 2 more operators, each one keeping pressure on different parts of a second casualty who was conscious and making noise about it. "Trauma Bay 1, Vachon said, pointing. The lead operator, a woman with a jaw like a geological feature and a radio handset clipped to her chest, looked at Vachon without breaking stride. "What's your surgical capacity?" "We're level 3, we have an OR. I need 2 trauma bays active simultaneously and someone who can manage a penetrating chest wound without asking me what a hemopneumothorax is." She put the litter down on the Bay 1 bed without ceremony. "Can you do that?" Vachon opened his mouth. The operator looked past him. Her eyes moved across the assembled staff, the way a scanner moves across a page. Quick, methodical, looking for a specific return. She looked at Desroche. She looked at Pelland, who was still against the wall. She looked at Thibodeau. He stopped at Élise. Not because Élise had moved. She hadn't. Not because she'd spoken. She'd said nothing. But something in how she was standing, the position of her weight, the placement of her hands, the fact that she was the only person in the room whose breathing hadn't changed, made the operator's eyes lock and stay. "You," the operator said. "What's your background?" Thibodeau stepped forward. "She's a float nurse, agency. She's not part of my—" "I didn't ask you." The operator hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't needed to. "What's your background?" Élise looked at the man on the litter. His name tape read Cormier. He was in his late 20s. His tactical shirt had been cut open, and his chest had been dressed in the field. A vented chest seal on the left side, the kind issued to Kanzofcom medics. The dressing was saturated. The seal was bubbling. His trachea was sitting slightly off-center, shifted to the right, which meant the tension was building on the left. He had, in Élise's estimation, between 4 and 8 minutes before the pressure collapsed his remaining lung capacity and stopped his heart. She walked forward. "Tremblay," Thibodeau said, "you are not authorized." Élise looked at Thibodeau. It was not a long look. It did not need to be. It was the look of someone who has made accurate decisions under fire and is now in a room full of people debating paperwork. It communicated all of this without any particular hostility, which made it worse. "I need the chest tube tray," Élise said. 14-gauge needle, a 10-blade, curved clamps, and a 32 French tube. I need suction, and I need someone to hold his shoulders down. I will not be asking twice." The operator grabbed Cormier's shoulders without being told again. Thibodeau did not move. Marguerite. Élise used her first name without thinking about it. Her voice had gone somewhere else, somewhere flat and specific. The tray. Now. Or we have this conversation at the inquest instead. Thibodeau got the tray. Pelland, the junior nurse against the wall, was the one who surprised her. The young woman pushed off the wall, grabbed the suction unit from the corner, and rolled it to the bedside without speaking. Her hands were shaking, but she moved them anyway. Élise clocked that, filed it somewhere. "Cormier," Élise said, pulling on gloves. "I'm going to decompress your chest. You're going to feel pressure. Do not move." Cormier looked at her. His lips were going bluish. "You sound like Bouchard," he said. His voice was barely there. Élise did not respond to that. She found the second intercostal space at the midclavicular line. His skin was cold and damp. She tore open the needle packaging with her teeth. "Hold," she said. She went in. The hiss was immediate. A sharp, ugly release of trapped air and aerosolized blood that fogged briefly on the catheter hub. Cormier's whole body jerked once, and then the tension left his shoulders. Not relaxation, relief. The structural kind, the relief of a building that has stopped trying to collapse. "Trachea's coming back," Vachon said from the edge of the bay. He'd moved closer. He was watching. His voice had changed from the authority register to the observation register, which meant he'd stopped trying to manage the situation and started trying to learn from it. "It's temporary," Élise said. "I need to place the tube before the pressure rebuilds." She switched instruments. Pelland handed things before she asked for them, correctly, which meant the young woman had been watching surgical procedures and not just filing away theory. Élise made a note of that too. The incision went in at the 5th intercostal space, anterior mid-axillary line. She worked fast, not rushed. There's a specific difference between fast and rushed, the difference between a knife cut and a hack, but economically, with no movement that didn't accomplish something. The operator across the bed, her hands with an expression Élise couldn't fully read. Respect, maybe. Recognition. The particular way one professional watches another professional and understands they are in the presence of a standard they were trained to meet. Blood welled dark and immediate. Élise placed the tube, aimed posterior, fed it with her finger to confirm position. The suction gurgled to life and fluid began moving through the transparent plastic in a way that meant the lung had room to expand. Cormier breathed. Not the thin, desperate gasping of a man whose chest was losing the fight, but actual breath, deep and cautious, like someone testing whether a bridge will hold their weight. "Sats climbing," Pellin said, reading the monitor. Her voice was steady. She had decided to be steady, and she was. "Get me blood type from his dog tags," Élise said. "And call your lab for O negative if his type isn't in the system. He'll need transfusion before surgery." She stepped back. Her gloves were soaked to the wrist and there was a stripe of blood across the front of her scrubs. "Who's managing Bay 2? "Lavoie is," Thibodeau started. "The second casualty is a blast injury to the lower limbs," the operator said. "The tourniquet's been on for," she checked her watch, 41 minutes. "Then he needs a surgeon now, not a hospitalist." Élise was already moving toward Bay 2. "Where's your trauma surgeon on call?" Vachon was on his phone. 15 minutes out. 15, Élise repeated. She said it the way you say a number you've already calculated around. Bay 2's casualty was a man named Arsenault, according to his name tape. Younger than Cormier. 22, maybe 23. He was awake and furious about it. A second operator, shorter, with a bruised jaw and a lot of dried blood on his sleeve that didn't appear to be his own, was holding the improvised tourniquet in place above Arsenault's right knee. What was below the right knee was something that the two nurses who'd entered Bay 2 ahead of Élise had stepped back from. Not out of incompetence, out of a very human response to seeing something that falls outside the visual vocabulary of a civilian emergency room. Élise did not step back. "When did this happen?" she asked the operator. 90 minutes ago. "Transport time?" 40 of that was the extraction. We had to get out of a live situation before we could move him. Edith crouched and looked at the wound. The tourniquet was holding, but only just. The tissue around it had started to do things that meant the clock was running down faster than the number suggested. She stood up. "He needs the R. Vascular surgery if your trauma surgeon can't manage it. He cannot wait 15 minutes. She looked at the operator. "Did your team bring blood product?" "We burned through it on the flight." "All right." She turned to Thibodeau, who had followed her to Bay 2. The charge nurse was standing in the doorway with an expression Élise had seen before. The expression of someone whose map of the situation has stopped matching the territory. "Marguerite, get the OR team on the phone and tell them we're sending up an arterial injury. Tell them not to wait for the attending." "Tell them," I said. "Who said?" Thibodeau repeated. Her voice had lost some of its edge. "Not all of it. Some of it. Tell them the patient's hemodynamic status is deteriorating and the window is closing, and if they wait for a surgical consult in the standard format, he will lose the leg. Possibly more." Élise held her gaze. "Tell them." Thibodeau went to the phone. Arsenault was looking at Élise. His eyes were the color of creek water, pale green and very direct. "You know what you're doing," he said. "Not a question." "I do," she said. "You don't look like." "I know," she said. "Lie still." The OR took the call. They took Arsenault up 6 minutes before the trauma surgeon arrived, which meant Élise was standing in Bay 2 with blood on her hands, and no particular expression on her face when Dr. Marchand walked in from the parking garage and stopped short. "What happened to my patient?" "He's already in surgery," Vachon said. "He was standing off to the side, still in observation mode. He would have lost the leg if we'd waited." Marchand looked at Ellis. "Who are you?" "Float nurse," she said. "Agency." "Aren't." A silence moved through the room. Marchand looked at Vachon. Vachon gave him a look that communicated approximately 3 paragraphs of information without words. Marchand said, carefully, "Who placed the chest tube in Bay 1? "Same person," Vachon said. There was another silence. Marchand looked at Elise's hands, still gloved, still dark. He looked at her face, which was doing nothing in particular. He said, "I want to talk to you when this is done," and then went to scrub in. It took another hour for the department to process back towards something resembling normal. The other two casualties were less critical. One a fracture, one a soft tissue wound that looked dramatic and wasn't. And the operators cycled through the waiting area with the patience of people who'd learned that impatience in hospitals accomplishes nothing. They sat in the plastic chairs and drank terrible vending machine coffee and didn't speak unless spoken to. The lead operator found Élise in the medication room. She knocked on the door frame before entering, which struck Élise as a very particular kind of consideration, from someone who had, 90 minutes earlier, walked past a charge nurse and a physician as though they were furniture. "Cormier's stable," she said. "They're telling us he'll go to surgery in the morning." "Good," Ellie said. She was entering medication counts into the system. She didn't stop typing. "Arsenault's out of surgery. They saved the leg." A pause. "They said it was close." Élise nodded. The operator leaned against the doorframe. She was maybe 35, with the kind of face that had been weathered into something sharper and better than what it started as. Her name tape read Okafor. "You have a call sign?" she asked. The typing stopped. Élise stared at the screen for a moment. Then she said, "I had one." "What was it?" "It doesn't matter anymore." Okafor was quiet for a moment. Then, "Where were you?" 3 tours. Élise went back to the keyboard. 2 in Kandahar, 1 in Mali. I was a medical officer with the CFJM, field surgical team, forward positioning. We followed the rifle companies when they couldn't wait for CASVAC. She paused. Then I came home. And started floating. Okafor looked at her for a long moment. Why? Élise thought about how to answer that. The honest version was long and involved a highway overpass in Laval at 2 in the morning, and a phone call from a case manager, and a period of time she didn't like to locate on the calendar. The abbreviated version was, "Because it's quiet." Okafor seemed to understand that the abbreviated version was the only one she was going to get. "What you did in there," Okafor said, "that's not something you decide to do. That's something you are." Élise didn't answer. "Cormier would have gone into arrest inside 6 minutes, Okafor said. "I know because I was running the same calculation you were. I just didn't have your hands." "You were about to do it yourself," Élise said. "Yeah, with a lot more error margin than you." Okafor pushed off the doorframe and straightened up. She reached into a pocket on her plate carrier. She still had it on, hadn't taken it off since arriving, which meant she expected to leave quickly, and produced a small flat object. She set it on the edge of the medication counter. "Cormier asked me to give you this." Ballas. Élise looked at it. It was a challenge coin, the kind units give out for specific acts, not the ceremonial ones that get handed to politicians. The base metal was worn, the embossed figure on it dark from handling. She could see, around the edge, a set of French and English words she recognized from a briefing document she'd memorized, and subsequently tried to forget. She didn't pick it up. "He says he doesn't know your name," Okafor said. "He says all he knows is that someone who sounded very certain told him not to move, and he didn't, and then he could breathe again." Élise looked at the coin, at the counter, at her hands which were clean now, scrubbed back to something that looked like a nurse's hands and not what they'd been 45 minutes ago. "Tell him my name is Tremblay," she said. "Tell him to rest." Okafor picked up the coin, held it for a moment, then set it back down. "I'll tell him, but I'm leaving this here." She walked to the door. "We'll be gone inside the hour. You won't have to look at us." I know, Élise said. Thank you. Okafor paused in the doorway. The world has a shortage of people who don't freeze, she said. Just so you know. She left. Élise stood in the medication room for a while. The coin sat on the counter. The fluorescent light above the medication fridge hummed at a frequency she'd learned to identify. 40 hertz, the harmonic of an underpowered ballast. She had identified it on her first shift at Sainte Marie, and she found it, on balance, less irritating than most silences. She picked up her medication count sheet. She stared at it. She put it down. She picked up the coin. It was lighter than it looked. The metal was warm from Okafor's pocket. She turned it over. On the reverse side, someone had scratched 3 letters into the base with something sharp. Field scratched, not engraved. The letters were uneven and deliberate, and they spelled out a call sign she wasn't going to say out loud. She closed her hand around it. She stood there for another minute. Through the medication room wall, she could hear the ER reassembling itself, carts being repositioned, the monitor in Bay 1 cycling through its self-test sequence, Thibodeau's voice organizing the next hour with the particular efficiency of a woman who managed chaos by refusing to acknowledge that it had occurred. Palande, the junior nurse, was saying something in a voice that had steadied into something new. Not the voice she'd had when the doors opened. Something harder and more reliable, like metal after it's been through heat. People always think the worst moments break you. They don't understand that the breaking already happened, somewhere earlier, somewhere quieter. And what you're watching in the worst moments is someone deciding whether to stay broken or not. Élise put the coin in the front pocket of her scrubs. She picked up the medication count sheet. She walked back out to the floor. Bay 1 was clean. The monitors beeped with a steady, unconcerned rhythm. Thibodeau was at the central station and looked up when Élise approached. There was something different in the charge nurse's face, something that didn't have a convenient label, not quite apology, not quite respect, something that existed in the margin between them. Administration wants to speak with you, Thibodeau said. They have questions about the OR authorization. I'll be on break, Élise said. She reached past Thibodeau and picked up the vitals sheet for the man in Bay 7, whose wound dressing she'd been changing when the afternoon changed. His pressure had stayed stable. She noted it, initialed it, set it back in its slot. Tremblay. Thibodeau's voice was even, not soft. Thibodeau did not do soft, but even. What you did today. Élise waited. Thibodeau looked at her. A real look, not the appraising inventory of the morning. It was good work, she said. That's all. Élise looked at her for a moment. Thank you, Marguerite, she said. She walked to Bay 4, checked in on the table saw laceration, noted that the man had fallen asleep with his arm elevated exactly as instructed and was snoring lightly, and moved on. Somewhere outside, the helicopters were gone. The parking lot had gone back to being a parking lot. The shrubs had re-straightened, and the coffee cup from the smoking area had lodged itself under a car and would be there until Thursday. The fluorescent lights kept humming. Élise kept floating. There's a coin sitting on my counter right now. I don't know why I haven't moved it. It's small and worn, and it shouldn't matter as much as it does, but I keep walking past it and not picking it up, and I think that says something I haven't figured out how to put into words yet. I've been thinking about Élise for days, not because her story is dramatic, it is, but that's not the part that stays with me. What stays with me is the moment before she moved. The moment she was standing against that wall, listening to a man die, knowing exactly what needed to happen, and choosing, for just a few seconds, to be someone who didn't know. I understand that moment. I think a lot of us do. We've all been in a version of it. The moment where you know what you're capable of, and the easier thing would be to let someone else be capable instead. What I keep coming back to is cause and effect, not in a grand cosmic sense, but in the plain, quiet way that actions accumulate into outcomes. Élise spent years building knowledge. Not the kind that fits on a resume, but the kind that gets carved into you in forward positions, in the dark, under conditions where being wrong means someone dies. That knowledge didn't disappear when she took off the uniform. It doesn't work that way. What you've genuinely learned becomes part of how you move through the world, whether you want it to or not. The needle went in straight because 10,000 hours went in first. The tube found the right space because her hands had been there before, in worse light, with worse equipment, with more noise around her. The goodness of what she did in that room was inseparable from the rigor of what she'd done long before it. And then there's the question of integrity. What you do when no one's watching, or more accurately, when everyone's watching but nobody expects anything of you. Thibodeau had already decided what Élise was: float nurse, agency, temporary. The system had a category for her, and the category came with a ceiling. Élise could have stayed inside that ceiling. It would have been easier, and she'd spent 2 years building the habit of easier. But easier and right are not always the same direction, and when the moment arrived, she knew which way was which. That clarity, knowing your own values precisely enough to act on them when it costs you something. That's not a personality trait. It's a practice. You build it or you don't. What I find hardest to describe, and maybe most important, is the persistence underneath all of it. Not the dramatic kind of persistence, not the gritted teeth pushing through kind, the quiet kind, aren't. The kind that looks like showing up to float shifts in a hospital where nobody knows your name 2 years after the thing that broke you, because you're still trying to be useful in a world that got smaller. That takes more than people realize. The resilience isn't in the moment Élise stepped forward. The resilience is in every ordinary Tuesday before it, when she got up and kept going without any particular reason to believe the going would ever matter. Cormier breathed because Élise knew what she was doing. Élise knew what she was doing because she'd refused, even quietly, even imperfectly, to stop being the person capable of it. The coin is still on the counter. I think she'll pick it up eventually, not as a symbol, just as a thing that happened to her, that belongs to her, that she gets to decide what to do with. That's enough.